Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to the Oxford Martin School and our special AI Governance Initiative event. My name is Sam Dawes. I'm Senior Advisor to this topical Oxford University initiative, which is directed by Professor Robert Traeger, and I will be moderating today. I'm also very pleased to acknowledge the presence of the Oxford Martin School Director, Professor Sir Charles Godfrey, with us today. Our event today will last exactly 1 hour. In a moment, our distinguished guest, Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, will deliver some introductory remarks, followed by a panel where I will pose some questions, and she'll be joined by Dr. Erin Maniam. After that, Lisa Monaco and Erin have kindly agreed, if time allows, to take a few questions from the audience on today's pressing topic, the promise and peril of AI in criminal justice. So, Lisa Monaco is the 39th Deputy Attorney General of the United States. She's a veteran of the Department of Justice, starting out as counsel to Attorney General Janet Reno and going on to serve as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, where she was a member of the Enron Task Force and later received the Attorney General's Award for Exceptional Service, the department's highest award. She served in a myriad of senior leadership roles: Chief of Staff at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, to then Director Robert Mueller, as Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, and as Assistant Attorney General for National Security, the first woman to hold that position. From 2013 to 2017, Lisa Monaco was the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to President Obama. In that role, she coordinated the executive branch's policy and response to a wide range of security issues, including the response to international and domestic terrorist incidents, cyber threats, and natural disasters, and advised the President on all aspects of counterterrorism policy and strategy. Given your absolute wealth of expertise and leadership experience, we're thrilled to have you here at the Oxford Martin School today to discuss the implications of AI, a topic on all of our minds. So please join me in warmly welcoming Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And thank you also to Professor Sir Charles Godfrey and the Oxford Martin School, and of course to Professor Robert Traeger also, who I understand couldn't join today. But I want to thank the Martin School for hosting this event and for having me here. It is wonderful to get out of Washington. It is my first visit to this absolutely magnificent place and this magnificent campus. My nephew is a proud graduate of Magdalen College, so I've heard lots and lots about Oxford over the years, but it's an entirely different thing. I dare say much, much better to be here in person, so thank you. Oxford, of course, has an unmatched reputation for making world-shifting contributions in our most critical moments. From testing and then supplying penicillin during World War II, to pioneering research on the digital world's impact on society through the Oxford Internet Institute, Oxford's legacy of harnessing breakthroughs for public benefit has touched every corner of the world. So this is a special place, and I'm honored to be here to represent the United States Department of Justice. Now, the mission of the Justice Department is to uphold the rule of law, to keep our communities safe, and to protect civil rights. With more than 115,000 employees across America and stationed around the globe, the Justice Department serves a unique role. It implements the administration's policy priorities, but it also serves as an independent investigator with 4 major law enforcement components, including the FBI. And it is the sole agency in our government that's empowered to bring federal prosecutions and to represent the United States in court. I've spent most of my professional life in the Justice Department, joining, as Sam said, fresh from law school to work for Attorney General Janet Reno, the first woman to be the Attorney General. It took us quite a long time to hit that milestone, 200 years, by the way. I later went on, as was noted, to serve as a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., and having served in both Democratic and Republican administrations and over multiple decades and through a series of inflection points, I've seen the Justice Department adapt to new threats and technological changes. In the wake of 9/11 at the FBI, I helped transform that agency from one solely focused on investigating crimes after the fact to a national security organization focused on preventing the next terrorist attack. And later, as head of our National Security Division, as cyber emerged as an increasing risk, we again reoriented to confront the threat. Today, as the Chief Operating Officer and the number 2 person in the Justice Department, I, along with Attorney General Garland, am laser focused on what may well be the most transformational technology we've confronted yet, artificial intelligence. And I'm focused on what it portends for our core mission. Every new technology, of course, is a double-edged sword, but AI may be the sharpest blade yet. It has the potential to be an indispensable tool to help identify, disrupt, and deter criminals, terrorists, and hostile nation states from doing us harm. So far, we've just scratched the surface of how AI can strengthen the Justice Department's work. But we've already deployed AI to classify and trace the source of opioids and other drugs. We've used it to help us triage and understand the more than 1 million tips that are submitted to the FBI by the public every year. And we've used it to synthesize huge volumes of evidence collected in some of our most significant cases, including the January 6th investigation. Yet, for all its promise it offers, AI is also accelerating risks to our collective security. We know it has the potential of amplifying existing biases and discriminatory practices. We know it can expedite the creation of harmful content, including child sexual abuse material. It can arm nation states with tools to pursue digital authoritarianism, accelerating the spread of disinformation and repression. And we've already seen that AI can lower the barriers to entry for criminals and embolden our adversaries. It's changing how crimes are committed and who commits them, creating new opportunities for wannabe hackers and supercharging the threat posed by the most sophisticated cyber criminals. Now, election security is an area where I'm particularly focused on the potential risks posed by AI. This year, over half the world's population, more than 4 billion people, will have the chance to vote in an election. That includes some of the world's largest democracies, from the United States to Indonesia and India, from Brazil to here in Britain. The upcoming elections crack open a window, I think, for foreign adversaries and bad actors to divide and mislead voters. With AI, our adversaries can radicalize users on social media with incendiary content created with generative AI, accelerating online harassment, hate, and disinformation. They can misinform voters by impersonating trusted sources and spreading deepfakes, easy to create and often hard to rapidly detect. And with chatbots and fake images and even cloned voices spreading falsehoods about elections, they can deny people their most fundamental of rights, to have their voice heard as voters. We've already seen the misuse of AI play out in elections from Chicago and New Hampshire to Slovakia. And I fear that it's just the start. Left without guardrails, AI poses immense challenges for democracies around the world. So, we are at an inflection point with AI. We've got to move quickly to identify, leverage, and govern its positive uses while taking measures to minimize its risks. That's why last October, President Biden announced an historic executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI to ensure that we are seizing the promise and managing the risks of artificial intelligence. Among other things, it establishes new standards for AI safety and security, protects Americans' privacy, advances equity and civil rights, and promotes innovation. It also charges the Justice Department to anticipate the impact of AI on our criminal justice system, on competition, and on national security. To seize the potential and avoid the dangers of advanced AI systems, the executive order summons the full power of the United States government. It directs agencies to use their existing authorities in new ways. Among other things, it requires that certain AI developers test the safety of their products and then share those results with the government before the products go to market. At the same time, our government is expanding this effort worldwide through a new initiative called the Hiroshima AI Process. We're working with allies to internationalize responsible codes of conduct for advanced AI systems. The United Kingdom is, of course, a key partner on so many issues, and it has been a leader in AI safety, using the Global AI Safety Summit last year to launch the AI Safety Institute, a sister organization to our own Safety Institute at the United States Commerce Department. Our global work at the Justice Department also includes efforts to stop criminals and rogue nation states who want to use AI to undermine our collective security. Last year, right here in the UK, although regrettably not at Oxford, I announced an initiative called the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. That enforces export control laws to strike back against adversaries trying to siphon off America's most sensitive and advanced technology and to use it against us. To neutralize these adversaries, we need to zero in on AI to make sure it's not used to threaten our national security. So, going forward, that strike force will place AI at the very top of its enforcement priority list. After all, AI is the ultimate disruptive technology. Now, as we harness industry expertise and take international action, we have a responsibility, I think, to look in the mirror and to examine our own uses of AI. We cannot be exempt from AI governance. Right now, the Department of Justice is undertaking a major effort with our fellow federal agencies to create guidance to govern our own use of AI. These new rules will ensure that the Justice Department applies effective guardrails for AI that uses in the Justice Department and impacts rights and safety. So, for instance, hypothetically, if the Department of Justice wanted to use new AI systems to, say, assist in identifying a criminal suspect or support a sentencing decision, we must first rigorously stress test that AI application and assess its fairness, its accuracy, and its safety. Now, I want to be clear. These guardrails will be critical for the department to do its job and to deliver on its mission. The rule of law, the safety of our country, and the rights of Americans depend on it. Yet, for all the new ways that we're addressing risks in this rapidly changing landscape, we're not starting from a blank page. We're applying existing and enduring legal tools to their fullest extent, and we're looking to build on them where new ones may be needed. In the early days of the internet, some argued that we needed a whole new legal regime to deal with the nascent challenge of the digital world. As the scholar Yuval Levin has observed, new technologies, though, don't necessarily demand new structures. He recalls a 1996 presentation from the University of Chicago professor and judge Frank Easterbrook, who rejected the notion that the internet demanded a separate legal structure. He likened such an effort to developing the law of the horse. Judge Easterbrook argued that we've got lots of cases and precedent that deal with horses, the sale of horses, the racing of horses, even what happens when people get kicked by horses. But he cautioned that collecting these strands into a single law of the horse would be a mistake. Now, I'd like to think that the Justice Department heeded Judge Easterbrook's advice. We've evolved with the threat. We've applied and adjusted existing legal tools and added needed technology and expertise. For instance, we're incorporating cyber into virtually every category of our work. The same applies to AI today. As it did with cyber, the law governing AI will develop, but our existing laws offer a firm foundation. We must remember that. Discrimination using AI is still discrimination. Price fixing using AI is still price fixing. Identity theft using AI is still identity theft. You get the picture. Our laws will always apply, and our enforcement must be robust. The United States criminal justice system has long applied increased penalties to crimes committed with a firearm. Guns enhance the danger of crimes, so when they're used to commit crimes, sentences are more severe. Like a firearm, AI can also enhance the danger of a crime. So going forward, where Department of Justice prosecutors can seek stiffer sentences for offenses made significantly more dangerous by the misuse of AI, they will. And if we determine that existing sentencing enhancements don't adequately address the harms caused by the misuse of AI, we will seek reforms to those enhancements to close that gap. This approach will deepen accountability and exert deterrence. And it reflects the principle that our laws can and must remain responsive to the moment. Finally, for the department to help chart the course toward a safe and secure AI future, we need to build trust. Our mission, our values, and our work must be regarded as legitimate by those who place trust in their government and whose rights the department is tasked with protecting. We have a responsibility to lead when it comes to our own use and governance of AI in the Justice Department. We have to look and listen beyond our walls. One way we're doing this is by bringing together the Justice Department's law enforcement and civil rights teams and other experts to form an emerging technology board that will advise the Attorney General and myself on the responsible and ethical uses of AI by the Justice Department. Last month, the Department of Justice appointed our first chief AI officer to help spearhead that work. But we can't limit perspectives to our own building. To fulfill our mission while harnessing AI's potential, we need a range of perspectives. So today, I'm proud to announce a new initiative, Justice AI. Over the next 6 months, we will convene individuals from across civil society, academia, science, industry, to draw on varied perspectives and to understand and prepare for how AI will affect the department's mission and ensure we accelerate AI's potential for good while guarding against its risks. These discussions will include foreign counterparts grappling with many of the same questions, and they will inform a report to President Biden at the end of the year on the use of AI in the criminal justice system. Technological advancements have and always will fundamentally challenge the department's mission, because at its core, technology impacts how we protect people and how we ensure equal treatment under the law. Our work at the Department of Justice is to make sure that whatever comes now or next adheres to the law and is consistent with our values. our responses today and the responsibilities we take on, from our work at the Justice Department to your work right here at Oxford, will shape the role AI plays in our lives now and for decades to come. Thank you for having me here today. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. That was an incredible tour de force, and we're honoured that you've chosen Oxford to announce your new Justice AI initiative today. Now, to our moderated panel, I'm delighted that you'll be joined by Dr. Aaron Maniam. Dr. Maniam is Fellow of Practice and Director of Digital Transformation Education at Oxford's Blavatnik School of Government, focusing on how governments can better use, regulate, and enable digital technologies. Founder of the Centre for Strategic Futures, Aaron had a distinguished career as a Singaporean civil servant, including serving as a diplomat in Singapore's embassy in Washington, D.C. He currently co-chairs the World Economic Forum's Global Council on the Future of Technology Policy and is a member of the OECD's expert group on AI. His Oxford doctorate compared digital policy in Estonia, New Zealand, and Singapore. If that's not enough, he's also an award-winning poet. And refreshingly for a technologist, he champions the approach that humans achieve better outcomes when we focus less on linear engineering approaches and more on human-centered design and on seeing our environments as ecologies rather than purely mechanical systems. So lovely to have you here too, Aaron. So Lisa, to start us off, in the light of your reflection that AI is accelerating the risks to our collective security, what more do you feel the US and UK should be doing to strengthen AI safety and protect us?
Well, thank you, Sam, and thanks again for just hosting this discussion, and I'm really privileged to be here with Aaron. As I alluded to my comments, we do have to be very concerned about what adversaries want to do with this technology, and I think we have to do a few things as governments. And we have a responsibility, I think, at its most basic level to ensure that this technology is used in the public interest, and also importantly, that it is broadly accessible, that it isn't leaving communities behind. With that broad theme in mind, I think there's several things that we need to be doing. One, we need to be exercising leadership, the type of leadership that the UK showed with its summit and with the AI Safety Institute, and that we are mirroring in our Safety Institute. Setting forth the mission of these safety institutes is really to set standards for sophisticated advanced models that will be put to public use. So having that type of leadership from governments, I think, is critically important. It's a unique role that they can play. The other thing we have to be doing, I think, as governments is using our authorities to drive industry practices. So what do I mean by that? One of the things in the executive order that I referenced is a use of what is really a law in the United States that dates back to the World War II era that allows the government to compel industry to do things in national defense, in the interest of national defense. It's been used, for instance, most recently in the COVID context to spur rapid vaccine deployment. So using this authority, driving certain AI developers to share information with the government about sophisticated advanced dual-use models, have them test those models and report that information to the government before it's being put to public use or being put onto the market. And then I think the last two things we need to be doing is enforcement. We need to be applying, as I said, our existing frameworks, our civil rights laws, our privacy laws, our competition laws to ensure that these technologies are not being misused and abused. And finally, we need to get people in to be leading this work for generations to come. We have a lot more work, I think, and we are not alone in the United States to try and do a better job getting people into our governmental workforce on these issues.
Wonderful, thank you. Aaron, the same question to you.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Lisa, for those really wonderful, comprehensive remarks. The one thing I would add, I think, to what you've described, Lisa, which I agree with fully, is that governments also need to be thinking about how AI, and generative AI in particular, is going to be interacting with other technologies. So as we do work on leadership and guiding industry practice and regulation, what is it going to look like when AI interacts with Google Glasses or Apple Vision Pro? Right? What's it going to do with augmented reality more broadly? What do we do when websites are going to be significantly more AI enhanced? And we're only just starting to touch on the tip of the iceberg on this, because I think those interaction effects are going to produce all sorts of both unintended consequences, but all sorts of things that we aren't even imagining today. Shakespeare said once that nature wants strange forms to vie with fancy. And in this case, actually, fancy wants strange forms to vie with reality, because there's all sorts of strange things that are going on out there. And we need to have policymakers who are imagining these potential futures and then figuring out what we can do to actually anticipate and hopefully preempt some of the more pernicious effects.
I think we're seeing the poet piece of Aaron's back.
We are. I love the Shakespeare quote, so keep
Got to have one in Oxford at some point, yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Lisa, as geopolitical tensions grow, how can we minimize the harms that might arise when other nation states develop and deploy advanced AI, potentially without guardrails?
So we need more guardrails, and we're doing a number of things along this front. So, we have to be very, very alert to the desire of adversary nation states in particular to want to put these technologies to use, certainly to advance their own military intelligence and national security states, but also to project power both at home and abroad with repressive tactics. And we are seeing it, unfortunately, at an increasing, I think, scope and scale. And so a few things that we are focused on in that regard. One is really being more vigilant about the sources of foreign investment into technologies and data sets, quite frankly, within the United States. Of course, the data is the asset. It's no longer the brick and mortar structure that maybe nation states or state-owned enterprises want to acquire. It is the data that's, of course, feeding the development of these tools. So being rigorous in our review of that foreign investment and the acquisition of those assets. The other is outbound investment, looking at and being very careful to review and having more transparency around how our investment dollars and know-how can be put to use by adversary nations to, again, feed their advances. And then lastly, as I referenced in my remarks, this disruptive technology strike force, going after those who are trying to get around the guardrails that we do have, the restrictions on certain exports of advanced semiconductors, the restrictions or export controls or sanctions that we have in place. There will be always nefarious actors. It's like water finding a crack. They will try and find a way around that, and we have to be quite vigilant in our enforcement regimes to go after that conduct and to target it at the efforts of these adversaries to go after those most exquisite and specific technologies.
Thank you. I think you make a very good point that we often talk about the hardware and software dimensions of AI, but actually the data ecosystem, which needs to be structured, accurate, interoperable, and so on, is also so crucial as we go forward. Thank you. Aaron, AI is clearly a multi-stakeholder challenge. What are the implications of this?
Yeah, and I think just building on what Lisa mentioned earlier, government's job, I think, will always have to be to provide a broad framework within which industry is going to play its part, right? But that means that governments have to do two things. I think one is they have to find ways to both develop the technology, to realize potential and opportunities, while at the same time providing the right sorts of rules and guardrails that set aside the boundary markers, so to speak, in what's going on. And I think in this respect, we need to find ways, in order to manage the pernicious effects that you just outlined, Lisa, ways for the private sector to also, in a lot of ways, pony up, right, and do their part in this whole process. This means that they have to recognize not just broad regulatory frameworks, they also need to take it upon themselves to conduct testing, to do the kinds of voluntary reporting that you're describing. And what governments need to do, of course, is to make it such that we're not relying purely on goodwill for all of that to happen, right? That this happens as a matter of course and in a stable, predictable way across different companies. In my own country, in Singapore, one thing that the regulatory authorities have started is something called the AI Verify Foundation. And it's a deliberately multi-stakeholder attempt to harness the open source benefits that might exist in the AI ecosystem. And really this involves bringing in the private sector to develop frameworks, to ensure that code bases are developed in ways that serve the public good, to ensure that standards are put in place, to also then shape, if not nudge, right, what exactly private sector behavior looks like. And I do think we need to have this kind of role there, because without that, private sector behavior will only happen in a voluntary way, and that doesn't bode well, because the corporate profit initiative is always going to be very strong.
Can I add something to this?
You can, please.
I think Aaron makes exactly the right points on, the incentives are not the same, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
We've got companies who are driving the building, the testing, the feeding, right, and the securing of these systems, and they don't have the same incentives. I mean, you don't have to go to the darkest place to say that. It just is true. And so one of the things that we can do as governments is to kind of use our convening power, right? Bring folks to the table as last year President Biden did with the voluntary commitments that he had a number of the leading tech companies in this space make, kind of signing up, all moving as one to sign up to red teaming or third-party testing their systems, right? To sharing information about how they are securing those technologies and their research about it from those who are trying to steal it, to examining ways to authenticate the provenance of content that is AI generated. So kind of signing up and using our convening power as governments to bring people to the table, because nobody wants to be the first mover, but if all of their fellow companies are doing the same, I think then we can drive exactly the type of kind of shared framework that Aaron's talking about.
Yeah, brilliant. I see a kind of equine theme emerging. You talked ponying up, and so I was taken, Lisa, struck by your law of the horse analogy.
Not mine. Frank Easterbrooks. My alma mater, I should say. Shout out to the University of Chicago.
Wonderful, good shout out there. So taking that analogy, could you elaborate on how far we can use existing laws to stop AI perpetuating discrimination and other harms, and where might we need new statutes, for example, perhaps on deep fakes?
Yeah, so look, I think we first need to really understand and accept and have it ingrained that, as I said, crimes committed with AI and exacerbated by AI are indeed the same crime, right? We can't think that there is, to a certain degree, we have to recognize how these traditional crimes, if you were, can be exacerbated by the use of this technology, and then respond accordingly. If it is even more aggravated because of the use of AI, we've got to recognize that as a society, and assign it the opprobrium that it deserves in that regard. So we have to use the tools that we have. So, for instance, our Civil Rights Division reached a historic, and I think first of its kind, settlement after they sued Meta, formerly Facebook, for the discriminatory use of their algorithm in how it was serving up ads in housing, or in its case, not serving up ads to certain communities for housing, which is a violation of one of our foundational civil rights laws in the United States, the Fair Housing Act. So our Civil Rights Division sued Meta for the discriminatory impact of its algorithm and its advertising algorithm, and reached a historic settlement in that regard. So we've got to do more of that, sending the signal that we are on the watch. we will apply our existing frameworks. We will not wait for some broader legislative action. We need to use the tools that we have and apply really foundational principles, principles about privacy, principles about transparency, principles about equal treatment under the law, and make sure we're doing that with regard to the use and abuse of AI.
Brilliant. Aaron, any comments to make?
Yeah, I want to extend on this horse metaphor a little bit, actually. I mean, poets love our metaphors, right? So we can't run away from them. But I do think the core idea from Judge Easterbrook is a really important one, because the issue here is we need to know when the horse stops being a horse and when it starts to become either a flying horse, right, or Pegasus, or a unicorn. But if the Pegasus is walking, then that's still, so you treat it like a horse. But if it flies, then that changes the nature of things. And I think the big question we are having to ask ourselves with AI is, when does that big qualitative change happen? It changes, I think, when the volume, the velocity, the virality of the information moves at such new scales and speeds that it begins to change qualitatively the phenomenon that we're dealing with. Right? When you have not just discrimination happening, but at such a large scale, at such an intentional, systematic scale, that actually new kinds of statutes need to be put into gear. And I think that's the big question that we have to ask. And this means that the approach towards any kind of policy framework needs to be agile and accretive, first of all. It has to look at what's out there and not feel that it has to boil the ocean all at once. It needs to be outcome-driven rather than focus on process and procedure. Because if we try and micromanage what's going on in the AI ecology, government will always be at a back foot. But if we're outcome-driven and saying, these are the outcomes we want to see out of any AI ecology, and then leave the private sector to figure out how they get there, but be really clear what the outcomes are and the consequences of not meeting them, then I think we're in a much better negotiating position. And the last thing I would add is that I don't think laws are enough. I think they are a huge part of this whole process. They are absolutely critical, but they have to be shored up by the convening function that Lisa mentioned, by the kinds of collaborative work that happens when you bring the private sector and communities and civil society in to actually change fundamental social literacies around AI. Because if we rely on law alone, we end up with a very brittle set of policy instruments, I think.
Can I give an example of this? I like your horse flying unicorn example. When something actually becomes you see it, the misuse of the technology. So folks may have seen a few weeks ago, we're having an election in our country, as you know. We have the New Hampshire primary, and there was a robocall, an AI-generated robocall that went out to thousands of New Hampshire voters that had an AI-generated voice impersonating President Biden. And that voice in the robocall urged individuals not to vote in the primary, saying, save your vote till the fall. So this is, I think, a good example, as Aaron pointed out. And our communications regulator moved very, very swiftly, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, moved very swiftly to take a vote in the commission just last week to outlaw AI-generated robocalls. So you need to have this, I think, swift response, in this case, by the regulator sending the signal that we won't tolerate, and I'll strain the metaphor, when the horse becomes, the unicorn.
Brilliant. Well, when is the horse not a horse?
Yeah.
Very good. I loved your example of suing Meta over civil rights and particularly housing discrimination. We've seen how AI, like facial recognition technology, can be used in ways that marginalize certain communities, leading to mistaken identifications and arrests. What can we do, and what are we doing about that?
So AI and AI-fueled technologies like facial recognition, or the ability to ingest, digest, parse, understand huge data sets, has tremendous potential to speed and make more efficient our investigative activities, to make them more precise. But we also know that they can be flawed, and they can apply in a discriminatory way, in an inaccurate way, to communities of color. And so we first and foremost have to be very, very clear-eyed about that. and so apply the rigorous testing that I mentioned. And also, and this is something that we're doing as part of our guardrails, we only use that facial recognition technology, for instance, for lead value, right? It can be a starting point, but it is not the be-all, end-all end point. It cannot be the sole source by which you are attributing an identification. So it can be one of a suite of tools to help us perform our work, but cannot be the sole source.
Great. Briefly, anything to add on that point?
A few different things, actually. I think that the kind of regulations and rules that we put in place around algorithmic transparency, making those clear so that they can be audited, they can be independently assessed for impact as well as for fairness and inclusion. I think all of those things are requirements that we need to put in place. And I would add that initiatives like Justice AI become so important because the kind of convening and community engagement that they allow us to do actually surface the sorts of biases that might be inherent in the technology, but which become much clearer once we get community voices much more strongly felt, I guess, in the whole process.
Brilliant, yeah. Perfect. Lisa, from a US vantage point, how do you see the emerging European AI governance landscape? We've had the EU AI Act, Council of Europe deliberations, and obviously the Bletchley Declaration that you mentioned. Have we got the balance right between risk and reward?
Well, look, at some of these efforts, it remains to be seen where those negotiations end up, but I just think it's so important that they're happening, that we are participants, very willing and eager and engaged participants in all of the undertakings that you mentioned, that we have a shared view of the fundamental kind of goal here, which is to have AI governance that both harnesses the benefits while we are alert and mitigating the risks. So the fact that we have all of these efforts coming together, where we have like-minded, not perhaps entirely on all fours like-minded, but like-minded nations, and we may end up disagreeing on some pieces of these elements, but at its core, I think the most important thing is the energy behind these efforts, and that we are coming together and having those conversations.
Brilliant. And Aaron, what do you see as the most promising examples of AI governance initiatives from outside the Western Hemisphere?
Yeah, actually, I want to give an example of what Lisa was describing, right? This idea of systems not having to be identical, but they do need to agree on common principles, and they need to manifest in a common focus on core outcomes. Because you used the word interoperable earlier, Sam, and I think interoperability rather than identicalness is really what we need to strive for amongst different national systems. The US and Singapore have a great example of this, actually, right? Last year, I think some of our ministers met in October to discuss how the different AI governance frameworks could become more interoperable. And between the regulatory agency in Singapore and NIST in the US, I think they did what they called a crosswalk, right? A cross-country mapping. The first country-to-country mapping of AI governance frameworks between the risk management approaches in the US and the kind of balance between development as well as regulation that's happening in Singapore. And I'm quite proud of this example. I wasn't involved in the work, right? It happened after I had left, but it was nice to watch because it's an example of exactly this kind of interoperable systems where they're talking to each other. They don't have to agree on every single thing, but they provide a model, I think, for where that kind of systemic conversation can happen, which I think could lay the groundwork for a lot of new developments later on. The US and Singapore were amongst the first countries that set up free trade agreements back in the early 2000s. And I like to think that this could be the example of AI-type agreements for the future, but begun, incubated, and prototyped between these two countries.
Can I just say, Sam, that Aaron is showing his versatility. Not only is he a poet, but he is well-versed in our bureaucratic minutiae. NIST, and by the way, the lingo, crosswalk, very governmental lingo. NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology at the Commerce Department that literally sets standards for industry and brings industry to the table to talk about what standards should apply to their work, and has done great work, particularly in the cybersecurity arena.
Brilliant, yeah, NIST is a real leader in this area. So very briefly, before I want to open up to some audience questions, talent is crucial for AI innovation. So what advice would you both give to any brilliant students here contemplating an AI career in the justice sector?
Sign up. Sign up. We need you. We need you. I mean, if we can get you to leave this amazing place, we need dedicated, committed, energetic, innovative, creative, principled people who want to work on what is, as I said, the most transformational technology I think we will see in our lifetimes. And we need people of goodwill willing to work on these issues, to tackle what are very, very difficult, intractable sometimes problems, but it's only by getting the best minds, the most committed and dedicated minds that we can do the types of things that we're talking about aspiring as governments and industry and academia to do.
Brilliant. Aaron? Very quickly, I mean, be good users is what I would say, right? If you can't regulate or enable the ecosystem around things without being good users. So use the stuff, right? Use ChatGPT, use Cloud, use Bard, play with it as much as you can, figure out what the problems in it might be. And the more intelligent a user you are, the more intelligent a commissioner and regulator you will be able to become later on. 60 of us played with ChatGPT in December at the Blavatnik School in a little module looking at whether we could apply things to policy making. And we agreed, I think quite unanimously at the end, that it was really good at giving us ideas. It was really great at comms, coming up with press releases, fantastic, especially in different voices. Great at red teaming, awful at evaluation of any kind, right? No details, no data, nothing. And I think knowing that helped us to be much more intelligent about the kinds of questions we want to pose to it. So the more we ask those better questions, the better we'll be when we sign up.
Great. Well, we're now going to say goodbye to our online audience.